It's a little after 9 o'clock at night, May 2nd, 1863. The woods around Chancellorsville are so thick and tangled, the soldiers just call them the Wilderness. A line of North Carolina infantry crouches in the black, nerves stretched to the breaking point. They've fought all day. Now they hear horsemen riding back toward them through the trees. They can't see faces. They can't see uniforms. They can only hear hooves in the dark. So they raise their rifles and they fire. The man who tumbles from his horse is Thomas Stonewall Jackson, their own general, the most feared commander in the Confederate army, shot down by his own troops. He loses his left arm that night. He's dead within 8 days. And here's the part that should stop you cold. This wasn't a freak accident. It was the exact thing men on both sides quietly dreaded every time the sun went down. Not the enemy, the dark. Because in the Civil War, the night could kill you in ways daylight never could. That's why so many soldiers feared a night battle more than they feared death itself. Let me show you why. Start with something strange. For a war that killed more Americans than any other in our history, the Civil War almost never fought at night. Out of thousands of engagements, real nighttime battles can be counted on your fingers. And that wasn't an accident either. Commanders avoided the dark on purpose. They understood something the movies never show you. After sunset, an army stopped being an army. It became thousands of frightened men who couldn't see, couldn't hear orders, and couldn't tell a friend from an enemy at 10 paces. To understand the fear, you have to understand the weapon. The soldier of 1863 carried a muzzle-loading rifled musket. To fire it, he poured powder down the barrel, rammed a ball after it, set a percussion cap, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Slow work even in daylight. Now do it blind. Now do it with your hands shaking. And remember what that powder does. Every shot threw up a thick cloud of white smoke. In daylight, a battlefield disappeared behind that smoke within minutes. At night, the smoke and the darkness together meant a man could fire his weapon for an hour and never once see what he was shooting at. Think about what that soldier actually saw. Not enemies, just flashes. A muzzle flares somewhere off in the trees, and for half a second, the woods light up, then black again. He aims at where the flash was, not at a man. He's shooting at a memory of light. So is everyone around him. And every flash could be a stranger trying to kill him, or the boy he marched beside that morning, firing in the wrong direction out of pure fear. So that's the first reason the night was terrifying. You couldn't tell who you were killing. In theory, uniforms solved that. Blue for the Union, gray for the Confederacy. In practice, it was a mess even in broad daylight. Confederate gray faded fast, often into a muddy brown they called butternut. Southern troops grabbed Union coats off the dead because their own supplies ran thin. Whole regiments marched in captured blue. And early in the war, before the colors settled, some Union units actually wore gray. Now take that confusion and switch off the sun. The single tool a soldier had for telling friend from foe just stopped working. The results were exactly what you'd expect. The first recorded friendly fire incident of the war happened in June 1861 at Fairfax Courthouse in Virginia. Retreating Confederate cavalry came back toward their own infantry in the dark, and the infantry shot them down. At the First Battle of Bull Run, a Massachusetts regiment opened fire while still bunched in column, and men in the front ranks were cut down by their own comrades behind them. One historian who spent years cataloging these cases reached a grim conclusion. Across the whole war, friendly fire struck on average about once every 10 days. And that's only the cases someone bothered to write down. In the dark, nobody could even count. But friendly fire was only part of it. Because the second reason men feared the night was that the Army's whole nervous system broke down after sundown. Think about how a Civil War army actually worked. There were no radios, no reliable way to send a message except a man on a horse or a man on foot, carrying words from one officer to the next. Orders were shouted across the line. Movements were coordinated by sight, by flags, by buglers, by watching the unit beside you and matching it. Take away sight, and all of that collapses. Officers couldn't see their own men. Men couldn't see their officers. Orders arrived late, or arrived wrong, or never arrived at all. There are accounts of single units receiving several different commands in one stretch of fighting, every one of them contradicting the last. And these were not armies trained for the dark. Night fighting wasn't in the drill manual. Soldiers learned to march, wheel, and fire in formation by daylight, over and over, until it was muscle memory. None of that muscle memory worked in the black. The cavalry that scouted ahead and warned of danger was nearly useless at night. The pickets who guarded the camp couldn't see past a few yards. So a commander who attacked in the dark was gambling everything on ground he couldn't see, against an enemy he couldn't count, with men he couldn't control. Armies tried to manage it with passwords. Before nightfall, the day's countersign went out along the line. Challenge a shape in the dark, and the right word back meant friend. The wrong word, or silence, meant enemy. It sounds tidy. It almost never worked. The man carrying the password got lost. New troops never received it. And a nervous soldier with a loaded rifle doesn't always wait for an answer. Picture how that fails. A shape moves in the dark. A sentry calls the challenge into the black, his voice shaking. 1 second of silence. 2. Maybe the man out there is fumbling for the word. Maybe he's deaf from a day of cannon fire and never heard the call. It doesn't matter. The silence alone is enough. The sentry fires. And only when they drag the body in do they find the right uniform underneath. Which brings us to the third reason, and maybe the deepest one. The enemy in a night battle wasn't only the army across the field. It was the soldier's own mind. Put a man alone in the dark, exhausted, certain that death is somewhere out past the tree line, and his eyes start to lie to him. Every stump becomes a crouching man. Every branch creak becomes a footstep. One Confederate soldier, a Tennessean named Sam Watkins, left an account of standing picket on a freezing night and slowly convincing himself that a shape in the gloom ahead was an enemy soldier. He could see the hat, he thought. He could see the coat. He could see the gun. Cold sweat ran down his back. Finally, he gathered his nerve, charged forward, and drove his bayonet straight through it. It was a tree stump. He laughed about it later, but multiply that one terrified man by 1,000, hand them all loaded rifles, and point them at each other in the dark. That's a night battle. And the men who lived through one understood exactly how it would go. So the fear wasn't weakness, it was math. In daylight, a soldier could at least see the danger coming. He could find his unit, follow orders, aim at the right men. At night, every one of those small certainties vanished, and the odds of dying for nothing, shot by a friend, lost in the confusion, killed by a mistake, went straight up. Now let me show you what happened when commanders ignored all of that. October 28, 1863, Tennessee. The Union Army was trapped and starving inside Chattanooga, and a small force had just opened a thin supply line through Lookout Valley. The Confederates wanted that line shut. So Lieutenant General James Longstreet ordered something almost unheard of in this war: a full night attack. The target was an isolated Union division at a crossroads called Wauhatchie, commanded by General John Geary. The assault was supposed to begin at 10 o'clock. But this was the dark, and the dark does what it always does. Confusion tangled the columns. The attack didn't go in until around midnight. When it finally hit, Geary's men were caught half asleep, and they scrambled into a strange bent battle line shaped like a V to fight off enemies coming from more than one direction at once. Picture that. Firing outward into pitch blackness, muzzle flashes the only light. No idea how many men were out there in the trees. Then the night did what the night does. Hooker, the senior Union general nearby, heard the gunfire and sent reinforcements marching 3 miles through the dark to help. On the way, those reinforcements blundered straight into Confederate troops holding the hills above the road. Now there were 2 confused fights happening in the black at once, neither side able to see the shape of the battle they were in. Men fired at sounds. Units lost each other completely, and in the middle of it, a single bullet found an 18-year-old Union lieutenant named Edward Geary, an artillery officer, hit in the head and killed where he stood. His father was General John Geary, the same Geary commanding the division that night. The general spent the battle directing the desperate defense, not yet knowing his own son lay dead a short distance away. When he found out, he wrote of his boy as a child cut down in the bud of his life. That is what a night battle delivered, not glory. A father and his dead son, both wearing the same uniform on the same field, in the same dark. The Confederates pulled back before dawn. The Union held the supply line, and the men trapped in Chattanooga got their food. But Wauhatchie went down as exactly what every soldier already feared the dark would be. Chaos, blundering columns, friendly fire, and death that came at random. Now go back to that line of North Carolina infantry from the very beginning. Because the man they shot wasn't just any soldier. Stonewall Jackson had spent 2 years terrifying Union generals. On that very day at Chancellorsville, he'd just pulled off one of the most brilliant flanking attacks in American military history, smashing the Union right and driving it back miles. He wanted to keep pushing, so he rode forward into the dark to scout the next attack. And when he came back, his own men, edgy and unable to see, took him for enemy cavalry and fired. He was hit 3 times. 4 of his staff officers were killed. Surgeons amputated his left arm that night. For a few days, he seemed to be healing. Then his lungs failed. His doctors called it pneumonia, though modern analysis suggests a blood clot from the wound may have been the real killer. On May 10, 1863, Stonewall Jackson died. When Robert E. Lee got the news, he said he had lost his right arm. Sit with that. The Confederacy's most dangerous field general wasn't killed by the Union Army. He was killed by the dark and by his own soldiers on the night of his greatest victory. The men who shot him were among the most loyal he had. They'd have followed him into anything, and in the end, the only thing that stopped him was their own rifles, fired blind. There is no clearer answer to why these men feared the night. So this is the truth behind the fear. A Civil War soldier didn't dread death the way you might think. Death in daylight had a shape. It came from the front, from the enemy, where you could see it, aim back at it, maybe even understand it. Night battle took all of that away. It made death random. It made death silent. And worst of all, it made death something that could just as easily wear your own uniform and answer to your own flag. That's why so many of them, given the choice, would rather have faced the enemy at noon than their own friends at midnight. Dying was always part of the bargain. Being killed for nothing, by a man on your own side who simply couldn't see your face, that was the nightmare they couldn't shake. And the men who pulled the trigger on Jackson carried it the rest of their lives. They went home, they grew old, and they had to live every day knowing what the dark had made them do. If you want to see how thin the line really was between courage and catastrophe in this war, watch our breakdown of Chancellorsville next, the battle where Jackson won everything and lost it all in a single night. And if stories like this are what you come here for, subscribe, and we'll keep digging up the history the textbooks rush right past.